A written version of this review can be found at demajen.co.uk/Super Roboy. Hello everybody, let's start off with the usual disclaimers. I was a playtester for Super Roboy and a Kickstarter backer for the game, so I do have a vested interest in it being good, because I've put money towards it being good, but otherwise have received no financial compensation or sponsorship for this review. This is not a sponsored video, and I feel like I need to say this because people have somehow got this idea in their heads that I am, quote unquote, a journalist or part of big games media, which I have to say in as scoffing voice as I can because I find it hilarious. I am not a journalist. I know how to be a journalist, trained English teacher, media studies specialist, etc, etc. Not a journalist. You cannot buy my opinion. People have tried. It's not going to happen. This review is based on the final playtest / pre-release version of the game. If there are any changes between what I have played and what is in the launch version of the game, I will eventually find out because I'm probably going to play again at launch at some point, though it's a busy month. I will leave any differences that I find, any changes in my opinion, down in the pinned comments below. Also down there is the link to my map of the game, which I'll show at various points during this video, probably. This is not technically a Metroidvania map announcement video, but the game is mapped. This is more kind of double-barreled style thing. So, with the idea in mind that you can't buy my opinion, let's talk about my opinion of Super Roboy, which is an indie Metroid-like, realistically, developed and published by Vincent Penning. In short, it's great. The game's inspiration from a mechanical standpoint is pretty obvious. We've got something that's very, very space jumpy. We've got something that is very, very screw attacky. We've got various blaster style types and power-ups, and it all works really, really well. Super Roboy feels great to play, especially during the kind of end of the game when you've unlocked all the abilities, you're zipping around the map. It feels really good. But that's not to say that the game is completely without issues. I foresee, depending on your own personal tastes, a few people that might take umbrage with some things. And I'm going to mention them here because mostly this is going to be a really positive review. And I want to get some certain potential negatives out of the way. These were not issues for me. But I know the internet, I know enough about the Metroidvania community, and I know enough about quote-unquote gamers in general to know that these are things that people will pick up on. So let's very quickly cover them, and then I can get back to talking about the good stuff that the game does. Possible issue number one, the aesthetic. There is the entirely subjective question of the game's aesthetic. There is a cartoony style to the characters, enemies and world that is going to appeal to some and not to others. There are even comic strip style cutscenes actually which flesh out the game's narrative, but they aren't overwhelmingly prevalent. They're not forced down your throat at every turn, and you're not getting DC / Marvel levels of comic book art here. It's decent enough, it does the job, but we're not talking professional comic book artist stuff here. The game's graphical style does have its benefits. However, the performance of the game is very, very smooth, and part of that is because of the art style and how it's been compressed and so on and so forth. It's not massively intensive. That being said, although I have had zero issues with the game's performance, my rig isn't really a great litmus test for how a game will perform on most computers. You wouldn't really expect a 2D game to have any issues on a 4080 Super with 64 gig of RAM, even at 4K resolution. So me saying, oh yeah, the graphical style does help the performance. It's not a very useful metric for people, but some people care about that kind of stuff. So I'm putting it in here. So the game's aesthetic is very subjective. Some people are going to like the art style. Some people are not even going to notice the art style particularly. Some people are going to say, oh, that doesn't look very good. It's like, this is a game made by a single person. And as a side note, one of the side effects of how well the game has been optimized in terms of its graphics and its texture files, the enemy skill system, which I'm going to talk about shortly, from a UI perspective, the icons for the enemy skills look really weird and pixelated. It's not a big deal in the slightest. It is just an odd little observation that makes things look a little bit off, a little bit crunchy around the edges, when realistically you want everything to come across in the best possible way. This is probably an easy fix. I don't know, but it's just something I'm going to flag up, because this is the quote unquote negatives section. The other potential possible issue 2, that people might have is the difficulty curve. Now, I played through the game on easy. Not because I'm no longer a hardcore gamer or because I didn't want a challenge, simply because I wanted to get it finished. Not because it was bad, but because I wasn't blessed with an inordinate amount of time to actually play through the game when I got access to it. So I needed to try and get through it and to give feedback on the things that I am most interested in, which is the exploration, it's the map, it's the getting around, and so on and so forth. Combat is something that I can, give or take in certain games, realistically. So on easy, the game is, for the most part, a suitably well-named experience. It is easy, realistically. It's a reasonably casual experience. You can zip around the map, you get a decent amount of firepower. Yeah, there's not a huge amount of challenge, but there is the caveats that there are what I call difficulty ledges in the game. Not spikes so much. The biomes, there are lots of different biomes in the game, as you'd expect from a Metroidvania, and some of the biomes are where you expect to go later in the game, and they have harder enemies. And for me, that's absolutely fine. The further into the caverns of this planet I explored, the harder enemies I expected to find. That is fine. And it ties into the enemy skill system again, which we're going to talk about in a bit. But there were a couple of occasions where boss encounters in particular stood out as, I'm going to say, a bit more spongy than I expected. Sometimes punishing, but that was mostly just me being bad. Some of these bosses were a little bit spongy, even on easy. And they stood out. I mean, this was past the midpoint of the game. But it was like, he's taking a while to kill, and it's not like I can get too many more upgrades to my damage. What else can I do? And actually, I had to come back after I'd been and got some defensive stuff, because I was dying a little bit too fast, and the repetition was a tiny bit, but not a lot, frustrating. So, generally speaking, on easy, the game is easy. Now, I've spoken to another couple of people who have playtested the game, and they tried playing on hard. I haven't tried playing on hard, so this is second-hand information, but they found enemies to be a bit too spongy. So they bumped it down to the normal difficulty. Now, there's a couple of reasons. There's a couple of reasons why they could potentially have found these enemies a bit too spongy. And again, that's tied into the abilities that you can get that help you target an enemy's weakness. We'll talk about that in a bit. So I can't speak for them or their experience, as I literally haven't tried the other difficulties. But if you are the kind of gamer who absolutely has to play on the hardest difficulty or feel you lose your gamer card or something, keep in mind that it's possible, depending on how you play, that you might find the enemies quote-unquote spongy, i.e. you might feel that they have too much health compared to the amount of damage that you can put out. I know that people have passed this feedback on to the dev, but there's only been a couple of people that I've spoken to, so I don't know what the general response to this is going to be. And as I said, haven't tried it for myself, but it has been mentioned to me, so I figured I'd throw it to the review. And for me, that is potential negatives out of the way. So let's go on to the meat and potatoes, so to speak, of this review. Just as a reminder, unlike the Metroidvania guru, who goes into a lot more detail than I do about the different things that make up his Metroidvania experience, broadly speaking, I split my kind of measure of a Metroidvania success on 3 pillars: the combat, the exploration / biomes, and the abilities and traversal powers that are used to interact with both. And I tend to do them in this order, unless there's an interesting gimmick in the game. So let's talk combat. Super Roboy is a Metroid-like. It focuses very much on ranged combat. Whilst technically there is a melee button, and there are a couple of melee-focused upgrades, I didn't really use them much, outside of the enemies that you actually have to melee, because they are incredibly resilient or immune to your ranged attacks. They are few and far between. It's not one of those gimmicks that you like, oh, I spent the entire game building up my range power and now they're just throwing in melee enemies to piss me off. No, it's not like that. There's a small number, 2 or 3 tops, melee focused enemies that you have to use melee on, and it only takes 1 or 2 melee hits for them. So if you find the melee system a little bit clunky or whatever because you're so used to ranged, you're not gonna have issues with them. The controls for shooting were, in my experience, mostly excellent, with, again, a minor quibble that I have passed feedback for onto the dev, and it may well even be fixed and or updated by the game's release. As I said, my review is based on the pre-release version. If you've played a Metroid-like or Mummy Demastered or something along those lines, in many shooty-focused games, there's a button on your controller or your keyboard, whatever, that locks you in place so you can aim around more freely and not be kind of sliding into attacks or whatever. In Super Roboy, I found that if you press the lock button a little bit too close to other button presses, sometimes, not all the time, it wouldn't work. 99% of the time, not an issue. But after about the halfway point in the game, there were some bosses that throw a lot of stuff at you. And whilst you can see the safe places reasonably easily, if you press the lock button and it doesn't lock you into place when you think it's going to, you could find yourself accidentally walking into other stuff rather than kind of anchoring your feet firmly on the ground in a safe position. It was a frustration. A minor one in the grand scheme of things, but again, one that I hope can be really easily fixed. I've spoken about the concept of a unique selling point. What makes your game different to how other games have done the same thing? Super Roboy is a Metroid-like, so the question is, well, what does it do in things like the shooting that makes it different from Metroid or Contra or whatever? So the first gimmick, and I don't mean gimmick in a negative way, the first gimmick is what is called the target system. After you've unlocked the first of several target powers, and we'll talk about those in a bit, if you shoot an enemy enough, you'll build up a small gauge on them, and once the gauge is full, you can do a chunk of extra damage by pressing the target button. Now, these target abilities all have elemental properties, and you unlock them as you progress through the different biomes. So you've got Plasma, which is the first one, And then there's fire and lightning and bio and so on and so forth. And these can all be upgraded to inflict status effects on enemies too. So all enemies have got weaknesses to specific types of damage. And I can't remember off the top of my head what does what. So say you've got mutant enemies who are weak to, I want to say bio, but I can't remember. So use the correct element against the enemy and you'll do decent damage to them. And then on top of that, if you upgrade your target powers, you can actually deal things like burning damage over time or poison damage over time and so on and so forth. It's a good system. It's very simple and straightforward in terms of its premise. The weaknesses for the enemies can be looked up in the very extensive enemy bestiary if you need a refresher. And it's a nice little boost to your damage, which is also probably what contributes to that feeling of, ooh, enemies are a bit spongier when you reach a new zone and start fighting enemies you can't take advantage of the elemental weaknesses of yet, because you don't have the correct tools. The target abilities are also used as a type of key, essentially, to get you past specific barriers in the game. There are barriers that need bio, or there are barriers that need fire, for example. No notes on this, it works. It works, it's obvious how it works, it doesn't need massive tutorializing or anything like that. It's a system that works, and it's good, and it gives that sense of progression and, I need to come back here when I've got the appropriate ability. There are other weapony style upgrades like missiles and energy blasts that are layered in as the game progresses. But as I said, all of this, so much of the game actually is linked to the enemy skills system, which I'm going to be talking about in the abilities and powers section. So before we talk abilities and powers, let's talk exploration and biomes. There are 13 biomes in Super Roboy, each with their own native flora and fauna, as you would expect. They all look visually different, but they're not likely to blow you away with amazing diversity. They're diverse enough, but it's not gone so far as, oh, here's a lava zone, and here's a snow zone, and here's a desert zone, and stuff like that. It's a little bit more limited than that, but there is a nice colour palette shift for each zone. It's not like it's all built with the same sprite sheets. You know, there is variety. There's plenty of unique assets to each biome, but I can't say I ever really felt like I was being drawn to pay attention to the backgrounds much. There actually is some really interesting stuff kind of in the backgrounds, but I didn't really notice it as I was playing so much as I noticed it when I was screenshotting stuff later on and going back and doing the map related stuff, or when I was watching my footage back. So while there was nothing that stood out as, oh my god, that's an amazing background set piece like you might have in, say, Blasphemous 2 or something like that, there was absolutely nothing wrong with them. There's nothing wrong with the backgrounds or art, in my opinion, in this game. We've mentioned the aesthetic before. The environments themselves were fun to get around, there was a variety of obstacles and impediments, and this is important, of course, in a Metroidvania, there's plenty of stuff to find. So on the subject thereof, what kind of things can you find in Super Roboy? Well, you've got basic orbs in 3, well, technically 4 varieties. So you collect 3 life orbs and you get a new health reserve tank, just like a reserve energy tank in Metroid. Collect 3 ammo orbs and you'll gain extra spread for your bullets, so it goes from a pip 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 pip, you know, one shot at a time in a line, to a big kind of fan of bullets, allowing you to hit larger enemies multiple times with one press of the button. And it should be noted, actually, by the way, that you fire as fast as you can press the button. So if you know how to use Steam inputs and can fiddle with your button settings in there, nudge nudge wink wink. Collect 3 energy orbs and you'll gain an extra special pip for use on powerful attacks or abilities, which you'll unlock as the game progresses. It is, frankly, a nice little iteration on things like Metroid energy tanks. And completing an ammo orb was a chunk of an upgrade, which again it was noticeable in terms of feeling that little boost of power. The fourth orb, quote unquote, are essentially missile tanks, and unlike the other three, you don't need to collect 3 of these. It's not like a piece of hearts. You just gain an extra missile in your reserves each time you find one, and you'll build those up as you go. Other things to find include keystones. There are 3 shattered green crystalline fragmenty type things in each zone, and collect all 3, and they're used to open a special door to an item that realistically is mostly for filling out the story. But there's usually also some kind of reward or potentially a secret exit out of the area locked behind these keystone doors. And I think you need to find them to get the good ending. Not sure on that, but I think you do. As well as these keystones and these orbs, there are also Everbloom flowers. You've got little mushroom men. You've got these odd cavity type things, which I think are called rooters in game. ROOTERS, not the internet type. And all of these are used for side quests that you can get from various NPCs. And all of these side quests are worth doing for their rewards, because some of them upgrade your map. You'll want to be getting those. I'm not going to tell you which ones, but yeah. And actually, on the subject of the map, I should probably talk about that, since that's kind of my thing. So, aesthetically, Super Roboy's map, nothing much to write home about. It's a grid-based map. It's drawn in the same style as everything else in the game. Rooms open up on the map when you enter them. There's 3 types of terminal that you can find around each zone to enhance the map further. You can find map terminals, which, surprise, surprise, uncover the rest of the zone's map. Faded out, so you can tell which rooms you haven't been in. But yeah, map terminals, much like map stations in Metroid, it uncovers the zone. But there's more than that. There's also compass terminals, which uncover basic markers on the map for things that are out in the open or that you might have seen, as well as entrances and exits to the zone. Shows you where those are as well. And the final one is the secret compass terminals, which do exactly what you'd expect and uncover basically everything else that is secrets. So, things that are hidden behind walls, for examples. Except, around each zone, there are dozens of little floating, well, they look like little kind of shiny shield-like things, called, perhaps unsurprisingly, floaters, because they float. Now, if you collect all of the floaters in a particular zone, a door is unlocked, and it allows you access to that zone's yellow crystal. More about crystals in a second. They're rare, the crystals. The floaters aren't. There's loads of them. There's dozens of them, often tucked away behind secret walls or in tricky-to-reach corners, and there is a counter for them. So on the world map screen, you can see how many you have got collected, how many you've got left to find in the zone. You can also see how many items you've got left to do in the zone as well. If you finish one of the side quests, I'm not telling you which one, you can unlock the ability to see the floaters' locations on your biome maps as well, as long as you've also collected the secret compass for that zone. So if you're thinking, oh, I need to find all 68 of these in this biome, and I haven't got a clue where to start, one of the upgrades from the side quest can help you out. And the side quest that you get this for isn't super difficult to complete. So it's a pretty great system, if I'm honest, and it's quite a relief too that you get this ability to mark the floaters, or have the floaters auto-marked on your map when you are trying to do what I do, which is 100% stuff. Now, I've mentioned enemy skills and crystals several times. So let's get on to this third section, the third pillar, and let's talk about these crystal things. There's 4 types of crystals that you can find in Super Roboy. There's green, blue, yellow, and purple. And they all tie into the enemy skill system. Every enemy you kill in the game, as far as I'm aware, I didn't go through and check, but I'm assuming every single enemy you kill in the game, including bosses, has one or potentially more enemy skills tied to them. Kill enough of the enemy, or enemies, some skills have got multiple requirements, and you can unlock a variety of enemy skills. And these are purchased with different types of crystals. So boss skills, for example, are purchased with purple crystals. And a purple crystal is always pretty close to a boss whose enemy skill needs a purple crystal purchase. For example, the Sentinel boss in the Forsaken Wasteland, which is the first zone of the game. You get a message saying that the plasma target skill has been unlocked when that boss dies. But you can't just use it straight away. There's a purple crystal in the next room which allows you to finalise that unlock, to kind of fuse it into yourself and make it available for you. And Plasma Target will get you past several barriers that you've already seen around this zone. Likewise, in the first zone, there are several barriers that are made of cold grey stone. And you need the Spike Roll skill to break through them. But this isn't taught by a boss. It requires a blue crystal to unlock. And there is a blue crystal reasonably nearby. It's not just sat out in the open really, obviously, but it's not particularly well hidden or anything like that. So the tools that you need are drip-fed to you to get the unlocks for real progression. But there's more to it than that, because there is also super skills that require the aforementioned yellow crystals. Remember, only 1 yellow crystal per zone, because you've got to get the floaters all found in order to unlock the door to the yellow crystal. They do a variety of, as you might expect, fairly significant effects because they're quite rare. And the reverse of that, the flip side of that, is the common skills, which usually require green crystals, which are very common to unlock. And these are pretty much always passives. So they do things like magnetizing currency to you, or making sure that you take less damage from a certain elemental type, or maybe making you immune to a certain status element, or allowing you to cause more damage to elementally weak enemy types, or adding the burn effect to your fire weapon, or adding the poison effect to your poison weapon, and so on and so forth. It is a fairly robust system, and there are 90 enemy skills in the game. But none of them really require a huge amount of dedicated work or grinding to unlock. Instead, as long as you're killing stuff and the shooting stuff is fun, so you're going to be killing stuff, they're just going to be kind of drip feeding and unlocking as you're playing. And I found that most of the time I'd got, at least for the green skills, the common skills, the passives, I'd pretty much always got a green crystal to use by the time I'd unlocked a new skill. The yellow ones and the blue ones, not so much. And the purple ones, obviously, therefore purchasing boss abilities, and you always get one after you've found a boss. So you don't need to go to a special terminal to unlock them. You can just unlock them as soon as you've got the necessary crystals. You can get them in the menu there and then, and it gives this constant feeling of reward as you play through. As you'd expect, because it's a Metroid-like or a Metroidvania, with the right skills and abilities, you can get everywhere. And you can get everywhere really quickly, and you can do some really cool things in Super Roboy. And frankly, it does feel really rewarding and really fun to get around. You know, people told me, yeah, the end game movement feels great. It's like, yes, it does. And I found myself towards the last kind of 25% of the game really having a good time getting around this map. As an aside, because people are, if I don't mention this, people tend to ask me about it in the comments, so let's just say it here. Yes, the normal staples of a Metroidvania are all in the game. So air dashing, double jumping, wall climbing, that kind of stuff. Yeah, the things that you would expect are here. But with the addition of a few other things as well made possible by this enemy skills system. Keep in mind though, things like air dash, double jump, wall climb, you'd expect, because these are, you know, big iconic things, that they'd all come from bosses. Nope. So keep your eyes on the bestiary and enemy skill pages when it comes to that. Because not all of them come from bosses. So, I've got a 100% save file for Super Roboy on the easy difficulty. But whilst I've got that 100% save file, I can in no way claim that I've completed the game. There are 77 achievements tied to this game, and I've only unlocked 44 of them. So over half, but not by much. So if you are a speedrunner, there are multiple speedrunning related achievements for you to target. If you like routing, as in plotting routes through a game to get to certain things in a certain way, there are achievements built into the game for you getting to specific zones with or without specific abilities, which I thought was really interesting. I don't know how difficult they are to do, because despite mapping it, I didn't actually stop and think about, well, how would I go about getting this particular achievement or that particular achievement? I haven't looked into it as much. There are achievements for completing the game without saving, which is possible because it's not a hugely long game if you're not trying to 100% it. And there are also a somewhat tantalising selection of achievements that mention pacifist rewards. No, I have no idea how to get any of them. I assume it means that there are certain things that you don't kill, or maybe you just can't kill anything. I don't know. I won't be doing an achievement guide for them. But there's a lot of interesting ways of playing the game, and there's even a screen in the menu with certain perks for how to do this, which I haven't looked at actually. I probably should have done. In terms of game length, on easy, I completed Super Roboy in about 8-ish hours with 100% item collection, and I had a really good time doing so. A couple of people, as I said, who played the game before me mentioned that that endgame movement felt really good, and they were not wrong. Getting around to clear things up felt very, very satisfying indeed. But obviously, if you like to get value for money out of a game, and you like things like speedrunning and routing, and that, there's lots of ways of playing this game that will extend that playtime dramatically. But if you are the type of player who wants every game to be Hollow Knight length experience, because that's your frame of reference, you're not going to get that here. Yeah, it's not going to take you 40 hours to do your first run of Super Roboy. It's just not that kind of game. The movement is too fast and too fluid. There's too many things that you can do to help improve your character to get around. I don't know how much the game is going to be, but 8 hours for me is absolutely fine, considering that there are multiple things that can be done to replay the game with the knowledge and so on and so forth that you've acquired the first playthrough, as well as other difficulties that you can try on. So, I heartily recommend Super Roboy. Graphically, it's not going to blow you away, and the difficulty curve might give you pause in certain places, but it is a well-designed game. It's got great systems, which are fairly deep and extensive. It's got a constant feeling of reward for your exploration, and it's got a decent plot that, while not in any way really surprising with its quote-unquote twists, it's nevertheless well told and heartfelt. And if you are the kind of player that doesn't give two monkeys about story in Metroidvanias, you can skip basically everything. There's a skip button on all of that kind of stuff, as you'd expect, because, you know, there are speedrun related achievements. For me, Super Roboy is an easy entry to my B tier, right at the top of the B tier. It doesn't quite rival the likes of, say, Biogun aesthetically, which just creeped into my A tier, or Metroid Dread in terms of gameplay feel and atmosphere, but it is definitely better than a lot of Metroidvania games that I have played. Play it through and tell me if you don't agree that the game really feels fun to get around once you've unlocked all the abilities towards the end of the game. Because I think it very much does. It is an excellent game. On the subject of other games, because this is going in at the B tier and the Mobius machine is also at the B tier, I envision people asking me, which would I recommend? So let me just try and quantify this kind of as I sign off. The Mobius machine feels like a bigger game. It's got a more polished 2.5D visual aesthetic to it, and it feels in some ways quite densely packed, with a lot of different routes between zones. But for all its somewhat dark, sometimes charm, it doesn't feel as fun to get around as Super Roboy does. Even halfway through, Super Roboy feels better and more fun to get around, and the shooting and stuff actually feels better as well than the Mobius machine, even by about halfway through the game. By the end of the game, Super Roboy feels like a much more fun experience to get around. This is not me saying that the Mobius machine is bad. It is very much in my B tier for a reason. There's some great exploration, some great atmosphere, some great charm there. But Super Roboy, I would say, although it doesn't look as good in terms of its aesthetic and its graphics and so on and so forth, if you care about that, Super Roboy is a more fun to play game. So they're both in the B tier. They're both better than most. But if you had to pick one or the other, I would recommend going for Super Roboy. Despite its somewhat inferior aesthetic, I would argue, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to play, as long as you don't need your games to be 15 to 20 hours long. That being said, your first run of Mobius machine can be done in 8 hours as well, because there's an achievement for doing it in, is it 6? Or something like that? The Ultra Run, which I accidentally did. So there we go. That is my review of Super Roboy, coming out on the 20th of January. I very much recommend it. I think it is good fun. I hope it doesn't get overpriced in terms of how much it is going for on the store. But yeah, it's a really fun experience. Not quite up there with greats, but really good stuff. Really good stuff. Map for the game is available over at coffee.com/Demajen or over at demajen.co.uk. The game's already on my tier list. Yeah. Thanks for watching, folks. Stay safe, stay fabulous. Super Roboy. Recommend. Cheerio. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, why not click the like button and consider subscribing. Remember, you can ring the bell notification icon to get notified when new videos go live. And until next time, cheerio.